If you only get your knowledge of Star Wars from lore videos or Wookieepedia, how well can you actually know Star Wars lore? This is the topic of a recent thread on the mod installation subreddit, and I wanted to talk a bit about it. First off, while this isn't something anyone in the thread seems to be saying, I do want to say that gauging fandom by which types of media people engage in is never going to be a particularly constructive thing to do. Whether you read all the novels or read Wookieepedia articles instead, neither makes someone more or less of a fan. But when it comes to how effectively information can be passed along, what do these different platforms or mediums mean? In the past, I've definitely made criticisms of Star Wars lore YouTubers for being Wookieepedia readers, and I want to clarify that that is not meant to be a criticism of people who read Wookieepedia in general. It's a criticism of people who make money, sometimes large amounts of money, by making lore videos and putting the bare minimum into checking the information that they're putting out, sometimes just directly reading from Wikipedia for their scripts. Star Wars comprises a huge body of work, and everyone consults Wikipedia to some extent for pretty much every video, even just to see if it links to other sources they may not have heard of. Some sources also just don't exist in a way that can be accessed anymore, and Wikipedia in those cases often has the only remaining reference to them, and in those situations Wikipedia is the best starting point to find that stuff out. The problem for me on the creator side of it is when that becomes the starting and ending point of a video. There are also certain instances where myself or my friends have found lore videos by some even particularly large channels where the script of the video was pretty obviously and provably made by asking ChatGPT to write a summary of a Wikipedia page. And you could tell this because the video made pretty obvious errors, which were replicable by asking ChatGPT to do the same thing yourself. Specifically, information that isn't actually wrong on the Wikipedia page, but gets hallucinated into a different wrong fact if you ask for a summary of the page. So that's one danger if you're relying just on lore videos. But if you are watching lore videos or reading Wikipedia because you enjoy reading about these things, that's an entirely different story than someone who is creating this kind of content and doing it in a kind of lazy way. I don't think there's anything wrong with using Wikipedia or lore videos to learn more about Star Wars lore, especially if that's how you enjoy engaging with it. I mean, it'd be pretty hypocritical of me to think that lore videos are inherently bad. The thing that's always interested me most about Star Wars is its nature as this big millennia-spanning history pieced together from all these different and often conflicting stories. And for most people, there's just way too much out there to directly engage with more than a fraction of it. I've worked on fan projects that require looking at a lot of Star Wars lore for the last 20 years now, and for the last 5 to 10, it's been my job to do some of that. And I haven't read anywhere near everything there is to read. So for most people, let's say you want to know what happened to certain characters, like you read the Young Jedi Knights books as a kid, but you don't have time to read the 31 novels that make up the New Jedi Order, Dark Nest Crisis, and Legacy of the Force. Then Wikipedia or lore videos will give you an absolutely reasonable bird's eye view of his story. And I think for a lot of people, that's also how they find out which media they want to directly engage with themselves. That overview is never going to be perfect though. Different articles and videos have different quality levels, and editors and lore YouTubers make mistakes. I know that I make them all the time, even stuff as minor as omitting something because it's from a source I wasn't aware of. This is why every few years I'll redo or update videos like the Every Jedi Who Survived Order 66 video, because invariably I'll forget something and someone will point it out in the comments. I think where the biggest difference comes in between being a fan who reads the books directly or being a fan who watches lore videos and reads Wikipedia, though, is more about the nature of the media compared to the history of the galaxy. If you watch only my videos, for example, let's say my animated campaign breakdowns, you may form a picture of what the novels are like that's fairly different from their actual content. One of the things that I'm consciously trying to do with my videos is bring together as much different information from different sources as I can and try to put together some general picture of the galaxy from that. This is also something you see a lot more from source books, whether RPG source books or more dedicated lore source books like the Essential Guides. So in doing those campaign breakdowns, I have just as many episodes on something like the New Republic's early push after Endor through Sandor Dalvardis' territory, as I do on some of Rogue Squadron's involvement in the campaigns to take Coruscant, or Thrawn's attack on the New Republic. And I'm doing those regardless of how big or little of a role those played in the novels directly. This is because editorially in those videos I am approaching the galaxy as this thing with its own history, and where the importance of the campaigns comes from some idea of galactic impact, the size of the forces involved, and so on. And then the novels become this kind of window into that galaxy, because the novels crucially were not created that way and don't reflect that. This is also why in a lot of videos I'll talk about the different things that those novels do cover and the different ways the same event might get presented. For some of my videos, a lot of them even, the point of the video is to talk about the different ways something might get represented, but for others, like those campaign breakdowns, that gets beyond the intent and scope of the video. This kind of culminates in what I'll call the Abeloth effect. You may know Abeloth as a kind of eldritch horror end boss of the Star Wars Legends expanded universe, who served as one of the main antagonists in the Fate of the Jedi novels. She gets brought up a lot in fan discussions, especially with her connection to the Mortis trio from the Clone Wars, which people currently like to speculate makes her a candidate for a recanonization, given the Mortis trio's apparent importance going forward in the Ahsoka series. Partially as a result of this popularity and this speculation, a lot of lore videos get made about Abeloth, and they naturally start focusing on all these connections between her and other parts of the Star Wars Legends lore. So for a lot of people who watch those videos but don't read the books directly, this leads to the idea that Abeloth was kind of this web weaved through multiple stories, connecting a bunch of different things together. In reality, she only directly appears in Fate of the Jedi, and it's post-hoc references in those books or in some source books that came after, which retcons her connection through the other elements. This isn't to say that there's anything wrong with the lore being created that way, really the point is that that is how most lore gets created. And there's certainly nothing wrong with videos being created to talk about that either. But for people who aren't reading it directly, they're far more likely to hear about these plots and think of them as things that were set up for a long time and have harder connections between books like Fate of the Jedi and the earlier content. For one thing, it really skips and papers over all the reasons that these later stories were so controversial among Expanded Universe fans when they came out. And something like this applies to basically every different period of Star Wars publishing. Legends wasn't one story told from start to finish in one period. A second part of this Abeloth effect is that you may be familiar with Abeloth from this specific image. While this image is really cool and is meant to represent a specific form Abeloth takes, most people who see it aren't aware that this was actually fan art commissioned by Eckhart's Ladder for a lore video. I also don't think there's anything wrong with fan art being used in lore videos, particularly given that it's usually labeled or called out as such. I use our fan designs for ships from Empire at War Expanded when doing lore videos from eras with less visual content to work off of, for example. The deeper the lore cut, the less there usually is to work off of, and I've had some angry comments from people who are saying that I'm not directly representing what I'm talking about, because they don't seem to realize that everything that existed in Legends wasn't fully fleshed out with all these kinds of background images that you might see for certain other topics. Some of the most important moments in Legends history were never pictured in any way, and some of the most famous images from Star Wars Legends don't actually represent a story that was ever told aside from in that image. So going back to the campaign videos, where I use some of that kind of material, like my maps and battle animations, there are comments all the time asking for which books cover the Pentastar alignment and their fight with the New Republic, or which book covers them getting integrated into the Imperial Remnant. But most of those things don't exist in books at all. There's sometimes background information that's a major development in-universe, but handled by one almost throwaway sourcebook line, like the integration of the Pentastar alignment. Despite how many weird TikTok edits set to Land Down Under exist about the Pentastar alignment, don't ask, and despite how powerful they were and how long they lasted as warlords, which makes them show up a lot more commonly in my lore videos, the Pentastar alignment neither shows up, nor is it ever even mentioned directly or indirectly by the novels. Most information we have on them, despite being a very powerful post-Endor faction, comes from a couple of RPG sourcebook articles. This can sometimes lead to another variety of comment from people who are primarily fans of Legends via YouTube videos, where they'll lament the loss of all these stories about specific warlords, when none of them were actually stories in the first place. So ultimately, it's that kind of context that you're missing when you engage with just what we'll call secondary sources, aside from just not knowing when a whole video is made up out of completely misunderstanding some topic. But there's also enough conflicting information within books, and each book is of such a limited scope that it's not like any individual book is also going to give you that much extra context either. So with the whole breadth of material which exists, it's possible to have two different people talking who've directly engaged with two different sources on a single topic, arguing over it and calling each other wrong when they're both right.
From a certain point of view.
In those situations, lore YouTubers and Wikipedia articles may actually be more likely to give you extra information and better context about how the sources fit together than just reading one individual thing would. So, can you learn lore from Wikipedia and loretubers? I think the answer is really a very qualified yes, with the understanding that context matters and some videos are going to be better than others, even just looking within work from the same creator. Most people don't have the time or the interest to read everything out there, so I think it's best used as a way to help fill in gaps or add context around whatever media you do want to engage with directly. But most importantly, who cares? Unless you're just reading about this stuff or watching videos about this stuff because you want to find a way to argue with someone else about why they shouldn't like something else, Wikipedia and lore videos can be just as valid a way to learn about this kind of thing as the source material, as long as you go in with the understanding that it will have limited context and this stuff can be wrong. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to MarMar for editing. We'll be back fairly soon with the next episode of the Thrawn campaign breakdown, but there will likely be a couple more videos between now and then. I'm going to be gone for a weekend, and that kind of throws everything off. Thanks for watching, though, and I hope to see you next time.